Alrighty then, let's talk about Achtung Cthulhu, of Diffus's relaunch of their Keeper's Guide to the Secret War and Investigator's Guide to the Secret War for 7th edition Call of Cthulhu. Their original editions for 6th also included rules for Savage World, and they're completely gone now, cutting the Keeper's Guide back by some 80 pages or something silly like that. I think the Investigator's book lost about 24, I believe. And other than that, not a lot has changed. We've got a nice new nifty map from 1941 showing the Axis powers control of Europe, which is really nice. Continuing in the same style of the previous editions. But other than that, there's not a lot new. They have updated the PDF to be bookmarked, however, which is really nice and dead handy for keepers to flick through. But for the most part, it looks like the fairly standard affair, just changing of the stats from 6th to 7th, and that dropping of Savage World. Now, because Call of Cthulhu 6th is quite adaptable to 7th, this doesn't really matter too much. And I feel this is why I got these for free on RPG drive-thru. Because I purchased the previous 2 books, I got these in my inbox for free as updates, essentially, which was nice. Because if I had bought these, and I was considering buying these, and found out there was nothing really all that new in it, I'd have been a little bit disappointed. So what is in these books? Well, the Keeper's book starts out with a good rundown of the history of the war, timelining the exact events and putting the broad strokes out there for GMs to reference. It does so fairly well within the limited space they have to cover the history of the war, and it mainly looks at the Axis powers of Germany, a little bit of Italy, and the ally powers of UK and US. It doesn't really touch on much else of that, maybe a little bit of France here and there. However, this is enough to get most keepers engaged and informed to run a game of Achtung Cthulhu. There doesn't need to be more than broad strokes in these manuals for that, because there's so many resources and the World War is such a gargantuan subject to cover. If people are really interested in it, they can go and find as many subjects and sources as they wish and include them into the game. So I think it's prudent that there wasn't a lot of detail covered within the manual itself. So other than the broad strokes of the war, the Investigator's Guides goes more into the breaking down and understanding of how the military machine worked from the Allies' point of view, giving the investigators new occupations and new skills. They have things like parachute, ride motorbike, and scrounge in place of more traditional vanilla skills. They even have a nice breakdown here of the combat skills, which is just directly over the combat damage, dodge, and etc. So there's nice almost breakout of the sort of skills you're going to be using more regularly. Where I think this fell down is the update should have been Pulp Cthulhu, end of story. It's how Achtung works and runs, the way the world is built. It is very, very pulp in its presentation, and the enemies you come into contact with will kill you very fast, and that luck system for pulp really hands you essentially a second chance. I've ran this game both as pulp and as vanilla, and the pulps won out every time. It was far much more fun. It lended itself to the weird science more, and it was generally just a better time was had by everyone. So continuing with the pulp feel, going back to the Keeper's book, it does go into what the Nazis are doing with the occult, especially with two branches within the Third Reich, the Black Sun and the Naschen Wolf. Both are extensively covered within here and broken down and have a good amount of history on them. As well as that, you've got some new Cthulhu creatures, new mythos that have been whipped up by the Nazis and particular for this world. Again, they're all very pulp in their feel, hard to kill and take on some fairly interesting roles within the game system itself. It does have some weird science weapons too for the Third Reich, and I feel I really wanted some in the update for the actual allies as well. They do have the creation of Section M, and I think the Americans branch is covered as well with Mystique. However, they don't cover any real benefits of what they are doing with the Cthulhu mythos in the arms race with the Third Reich, which I think is a shame. They are touched on at other places, talking about essentially how they're using them. There's one about the Battle of Britain and how the Allies use a colour out of space to defend Britain against the Allies' invasion, which is pretty cool, and I'd like to see more of that in these books. But it is what it is, and what's there is good. So take it with a pinch of salt, I suppose. So just rounding up, I'm probably going to look at just a couple of things which I think are missing. I would like interactive sheets. To be honest, it's fairly bog standard in most RPGs these days. It's having something that can be filled out and printed. But it's neither here nor there. It could probably be fan sourced, that sort of thing. Going back to my point about the British, I'd like to see some weird science around about Section M and some of the more unique things that they could have come up with. The World War was heavily arms race based, and there's some really wacky stuff that they were produced in the real world. So I'd like to have translated that into the pulp setting a lot more. I'd also liked perhaps the option to play as the Germans. I know the pulp setting is cutting a fairly clear, cut and dry, you're good and you're bad, and there's no grey areas. But not all of the Germans fought willingly on the side of the Third Reich. Many of them fled, and the options to create some scenarios where you are the Germans that are perhaps having a conspiracy to maybe take out some of the key players in the World War. It would have been nice. But if you are a fan of Necroscope and Hellboy and any other Weird World War fiction, definitely check out Achtung, Cthulhu. It's a pretty neat little world they've built. Cheers.